Marijuana Research second year. My name is Josh Mizell. I'm one of the co-directors of the Institute. Eric Eshter is here. He's the other co-director. And I welcome all of you. It's good to see a nice turnout on this early in the semester. I wanted to bring your attention to a couple other events that are going to be happening this year as part of the speaker series before I introduce our speaker. In about a month, on Tuesday, March 11th, we have Nathan Donahoe, who is coming up from LA, who's going to give a talk on Green Rush LA, medical cannabis confusion in the wild west of weed. And so he's going to provide an inside or in-depth, behind-the-scenes look at cannabis entrepreneurship in LA over the last 6 years. And there's more information about his talk sitting out on the table. I also have, just as an aside, in case you would like to make a contribution to HIMR, we have donation forms that we set out on the table. At this point, the work of HIMR and organizing the speakers' events is all based on the generosity of the community and the university community, and so any support that folks are able to provide is definitely appreciated. And then our last speaking event this academic year will be on April 21st. In the same place. All of the talks are in the same place, same time. Dr. Sunil Agarwal will be giving a talk on cannabinoid medical science and political ecology, psychoactive substances and mental distress. And so he's going to be sharing some of his research findings from Washington State, where he's presenting a political ecology of health framework to help inform understanding of other contraband psychoactive biodata of social and therapeutic importance. So there's more information about his talk out on the table if you're interested in that event. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Sheila Murphy, comes all the way from San Francisco. And thankfully we've had, well, for her, beautiful weather, so it wasn't a difficult drive, but we're happy she's up here. From the Center for Substance Abuse Studies at the Institute for Scientific Analysis. And she's a medical sociologist, so I'm particularly excited because I'm a sociologist, and I know there are a lot of other sociologists in the room, so it's always great to have another fellow sociologist up here. She's been doing research on drug cultures and drug use for the past 30 years. She's been the author of 2 books on published research monographs on based on our drug research, one on cocaine changes, the experience of using and quitting, and then pregnant women on drugs, combating stereotypes and stigma. And she has an extensive history of doing NIH-funded research. And it's especially important to have somebody like Sheila coming up to HSU because the perspective that Sheila is able to provide using qualitative research methodology provides a completely different insight and perspective on drug cultures, drug subcultures, and harms associated or alleged harms associated with different forms of drug use. And so much of the public policy around cannabis and cocaine and other substances tends to be based on conjecture and stereotypes rather than scholars immersing themselves in the field and really trying to understand from the vantage point of participants what their lived experiences are like. And so the perspective that Sheila and her colleagues brings to the discussion and brings to policy debates is really essential. So I'm pleased, as I know you are, to have Dr. Murphy up here. So let's give her a round of applause.
Well, thank you for your warm welcome. I had a lovely drive up here, and let's hope that my mind keeps working because the 5-hour drive might have tired me out, but this is an exciting topic, so I think I'll be okay. All right, so the first slide, the times are changing. Preliminary findings from the San Francisco study of baby boomers and marijuana use. My colleague, Pauline Solis, and I were co-investigators on this 3-year NIH-funded study. Over the last 40 years, public perceptions of marijuana use have undergone a number of changes. when early boomers were teenagers and young adults, marijuana use was broadly accepted among youth cultures, but by the late 1980s, marijuana use, as well as other so-called soft drugs, was widely socially disparaged. Today, the pendulum is swinging back in terms of public attitudes towards marijuana, and marijuana use has become much more widely tolerated, as you know, living in Humboldt County. To the point where municipal, county, and state laws decriminalizing marijuana possession have been enacted across the country. We have 2 states that are beginning to have legalized recreational use. And one of the things we're noting is that the rates of marijuana use among baby boomers appear to be rising. And analysts predict a significant increasing in older adults' marijuana and other drug use. Now, what's important here is that older people's drug use is a very understudied area. I mean, people think of both drug use and drug sales as a young person's game. And so it was, you know, if I had more time, I'd talk to you about getting this whole project funded, which was really an interesting political event. But in a sense, this research is really quite new. It's hard to believe. Okay, so what we did was, in order to investigate the health and social consequences of changing political and social context, we are conducting an in-depth life history interviews with marijuana users divided into 2 groups, defined by varying social roles and cohort experience. We're going to interview 60 early boomers, those born between 1946 and 57, and 60 late boomers, those born between 1958 and 64, who are regular users. We hope to discover the differences and similarities between how early and late boomers perceive their own and others' marijuana use, their attitudes, their actual use patterns, and their perceptions of its health and social consequences. Slide. I like this part. Okay, and first we got to acknowledge NIDA. Thank you, NIDA, for your money.
Okay.
Very kind of you.
All right.
And also our program officer, Moira O'Brien. And we'd also like to acknowledge our study participants who bravely participate in our research. And we want to thank them for their time and their candor. And without their participation, we don't have jobs. We don't have any work, and I don't have anything to talk to you about today. So the next slide. So our overarching research question is, what are the differences and similarities between early and late baby boomers' beliefs, practices, health and social consequences of marijuana use, and how do they change over marijuana using careers? But first, let's talk about this early and late baby boomer stuff. Why do we do that? Well, we did that in response to a critique on our summary statement, but in fact, we give the end to understand later on. The summary statement is what you get back when they don't fund you, when you apply for an NIH grant. Or you get it, actually you get it back no matter what you do, but some of the summary statements are a lot more fun to get because you're going to get money. Others are just critiques. So the United States Census Bureau considers a baby boomer to be someone born during the demographic birth boom between 1946 and 64. People in a particular age cohort tend to share a distinct set of attitudes and behaviors because they all grow up around the same time, in the same period of history. However, the baby boom generation spans a lengthy period of time characterized by change, so it would be a mistake to assume that it was a homogeneous group. In fact, demographers warn that the baby boom generation is not monolithic. And actually, we should get on the next slide. Sorry about that. This is just the citations of the people in case you want to know. So Landon Jones warns us that the baby boom generation is not monolithic because those born between 46 and 57 experience far more social turbulence than those born between 58 and 64. Finzel agrees with Landon and describes 2 distinct groups of baby boomers based on differences in the socio-political climate and experiences as each group was coming of age. Early boomers, Finzel describes the early boomers as a group most influenced by the turbulent events and social movements of the 60s. They lived through the Kennedy's assassination, the moon landing, Woodstock, and the Vietnam War and Watergate, shaping their values and their life views. They were euphoric youth society, the protesters. The late boomers, born between 58 and 64, experienced all those events through the pages of history. In 2014, the differences between the two cohorts remain. Early boomers are likely retired, semi-retired, or beginning to consider retirement. This is going to have real import as we begin to look at our findings. Late boomers are entering or in the midst of their peak income earning years. Early boomers have adult children and grandchildren, while late boomers may still have young children and teenagers in their home. Early boomers are also more likely engaged with the healthcare system as age-related ailments become more prominent and may be exploring medical uses of marijuana as an alternative to conventional treatments. These cohort differences may translate to differences in risk perception of marijuana use, in reasons and motivations for use, and the ways they use marijuana. Next slide. Okay, so talk a little bit about our methods. We're using ethnographic and chain referral recruitment strategies, and we plan to conduct 6 interviews with 60 women and 60 men who are primary marijuana users. Okay, the next slide. So a little bit about who we're talking to. So they must self-identify as primary marijuana users, be born between 46 and 64, have used marijuana a minimum of 24 times in the 6 months prior to interview, or at least once a week. At no point will they have been in treatment for heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, or prescription drugs. We include those who have been in treatment for marijuana. We exclude potential participants who self-report problems with or treatment for alcohol in the year prior to interviews. Okay. The next slide, please. So we have 5 research questions. We want to find out what are the differences between these two cohorts in terms of their attitudes, motivations for using, beginning using again, and continuation of their marijuana use. How the two groups, marijuana using sets, by set we mean their uses, purposes, expectations, and experiences, and settings, people, places, and situations, how have those changed over time. Next slide. What sorts of regulations, rules, use patterns, and health practices have users constructed, and how have they changed over time? This was really important to me. This is the question I really wanted to look at, because it seemed to me as we're changing our policies, as we're changing our public attitudes are changing, we have a whole bunch of people who've been using marijuana over long periods of time, who've developed rules for themselves, social norms, ways of integrating marijuana into a conventional life, or failing to do that. And it seems to me that it's very important for us to get some of that wisdom. You know, why do we always have to discover the wheel when it comes to drug use? Or why do our young people have to discover the wheel? So this notion was that was very key to me. What are the exogenous factors affecting use? Accessibility, drug potency, drug testing, criminal risks for early versus late boomers. And what are early and late boomers' perceptions of their own health and health-related risks of marijuana use? And we gave each of our participants used the SF24, I think it is. It's an instrument that measures, it's a self-reported health measure. And interestingly enough, everybody says they're just fine. It's sort of like asking somebody what social class you're in. They always say I'm middle class. You can ask somebody who on paper is a trainway in terms of health, but they'll pretty much always say I'm healthy. And so I have a little less faith in these instruments. Okay, the next slide. What we did was, our theoretical framework is guided by what we call emergent intersectionality. And my colleague Paloma Salas developed this concept in the course of her own dissertation research from one of our grants looking at women who sold drugs. So the theoretical framework is derived from the basic tenets of three theories: intersectionality theory, symbolic interactionism, and constructivist grounded theory. The theoretical framework begins with the understanding that an individual's social location impacts his or her points of reference, worldviews, meanings, interactions, and behaviors. Thus, it is important to take into consideration multiple perspectives, even in what appear to be homogeneous groups. Feminist theorists have successfully implemented intersectionality theory as a way to see the multiplicity of women's perspectives. This intersectionality theory is a way of conceptually exploring the complex ways in which race, gender, class constitute power, inequality, and social meanings. Women are not just women, men are not just men, and a member of a particular ethnic group is not just a member of that group. There are variations in women, men, whites, African Americans, rich and poor. Gender, race, and class intersect within the individual to shape their worldviews and lived experiences. Drawing from symbolic interactionism, we understand there are factors beyond race, gender, and class that intersect with an individual. Thus, we expand on intersectionality theory by remaining open to other intersecting factors that frame an individual's thought processes and meaning constructions. For example, in the case of marijuana users, factors that may intersect to frame his/her point of reference may include his or her motivations for use, if he uses for relaxation, as well as for medicinal purposes, if she is an early or a late bloomer. Symbolic interactionism is a way of understanding human behavior that takes into account agency, process, interpretation, minded activity, role-taking, social construction, meaning, situations, and context. The goal is not to predict or control human behavior or to have some statistical knowledge about it, but rather to understand human behavior. In order to gain a more in-depth and contextualized explanation of human behavior, we must first understand as best we can the subjective intentions of the actor. Symbolic interactionists understand that social norms are merely one of the many factors individuals draw upon as a basis for their behavior. For an example, marijuana may be seen as dangerous because it's illegal, so it violates a social norm. But within a subgroup of adults, it may be seen as both a necessary tool for relaxation and as harmless, since marijuana is recommended for medicine for certain conditions. These two factors may trump the need to abide by social norms. Howard Becker told us that deviant behavior is a behavior that people so label. So if their peers or other adults in their lives do not see their behavior as deviant, then how can they see themselves as deviant? Symbolic interactionism focuses on the ongoing interaction between self and society, which are mutually influential in creating a shared view of reality through interaction. Excuse me. Utilizing symbolic interactionism allows us to employ the concept of career as applied to drug use over the life course. We use the concept of career not in the conventional sense of rising through the ranks of a profession, but rather to call attention to the fact that individuals' use of drugs falls into observable patterns over their lives. Many social scientists have found it useful to think of the various sequences, stages, and patterns of deviant behavior, illicit drug use in particular, as careers. We approach marijuana use careers with a theoretical framework in which felt effects, use patterns, and behavior correlates and consequences are influenced by social and social psychological factors that mediate the interaction between the drug's pharmacological properties and human behavior. We suspect that this interpretive process and interactions with other users change over time. So it's a moving target. Following the tenets of constructivist grounded theory, we understand that there may be other intersecting factors we have not yet considered that will emerge as we collect and analyze the data. We remain mindful and open to other intersecting factors that contribute to participants' perceptions and actions. Of course, the possible range of factors may be endless. But operating with the constructivist grounded theory framework, we can look to the data to tell us which factors are important and the ways in which they impact different perspectives or different actions or behaviors throughout marijuana use careers. We synthesize these three theories into a theoretical framework that can adjust, adapt, and conform to various areas of research, an emergent intersectionality theory that we can utilize as an effective lens to provide a deeper understanding of the thought processes and the constructions of meaning of the individuals we study. Okay, next. So here's who we talked to. Participants ranged in age from 48 to 67, with a median age of 58. 34 of them were older baby boomers, and 23 were younger. 35 were male, 22 were female, 41 were white, and the rest, 11 were African American, 3 mixed ethnicity, 2 Asian. Okay, next slide. Okay, so early on when we were developing this study, we were going to leave out medical marijuana. We felt like we wanted to study only recreational users. We started designing this study in 2007 and got funded in December of 2012. Someday I'll come up and tell you the story of the funding process. That's a whole other talk. And one of the critiques we got in the course of submitting all of these things was that we should of course include them. And thank God we did, because it's been very important for some of our findings. Age first used marijuana, we have the 8-year-old to 32. The median age was 15. In the past 12 months, the number of days used, the range was 24 to 365, with a median of 320. So these people use some pot. Okay, these are, what we did was, I think Craig Reineman came and talked to you all, and talked about, did he talk about a 3-city study?
No, he was speaking on Dutch policy, cannabis policy.
Yeah, well that's where he gets it from. So what basically, we use this use pattern thing. Because what we're trying to do is have people take us through their lives, and we show them these patterns, and we create a timeline of their marijuana use, right? So they create the timeline themselves. So say they started when they were 18, and they started with a pattern 1, and then we would chart how long they stayed in that pattern, whether it was a month or a couple of years. And then they would pick these for up until the time of the interview. And analyzing this is a bitch, let me tell you. It's very difficult, but we started doing a little of the analysis, which I will share with you. Participants' current use fell into 4 patterns. A majority, 66%, reported their marijuana use pattern was stable. And that's well, I'll talk about this later, but one of the things that was really astonishing to me was how stable people's marijuana use patterns actually were. That, the people settled in, particularly as they got older, into a particular use pattern and stayed with it like for 20 years, some of them. Amazing. Like I have 2 hits every night before I go to bed. How long have you been doing that? 20 years. Do you do it every night? Never miss. And the small amounts too, that's the other thing. Okay. So, the total number of years that participants use marijuana raised from 17 to 48 years. The next slide, I'm sorry. Oh no, we moved on, okay. Let me see, 17 to 48 years with a median of 42.5 years of marijuana use. The total number of patterns of use they experienced throughout their marijuana use career ranged from 1 to 15, with a median of 3 years. with a median of 5 distinct patterns of use. Okay. All right, now to motivations. The right slide's up now. Most investigations of marijuana, for marijuana use, examine adolescents or young adults' reasons for use, which include enjoyment, conformity, experimentation, social enhancement, boredom relief, relaxation, and coping. While many of the motives that older adults report for using marijuana may be similar to those of adolescents and young adults, Shukla's qualitative study of adult users found that older users are less likely to be motivated by conformity. And one of the things that we're finding as people get older, the number of people that they use marijuana with shrinks, so that it's less a social activity and more an activity that they do at home and often by themselves. As they age, as adult users age, fewer of their peers use marijuana, and socializing may be less of a motivation. In fact, some of the older said that they didn't like to be around other people, that it made them nervous or anxious, and they preferred to be around either close known friends or their partners. Reinerman and Cohen conducted a comparative cross-cultural analysis of the effect of drug policy context on marijuana using careers. Their survey respondents reported their primary motivation for marijuana use was relaxation, followed by feelings of euphoria, enhanced enjoyment, sociability, and viewing the world in new ways. Patrick and colleagues' study of a national sample of 18 to 30-year-olds discovered that reasons for use may change as users age, such as an increased motivation to use marijuana to relax. When asked why they currently use marijuana, our participants gave between 1 and 5 reasons with a total of 34 answers. Relaxation, to deal with pain, to sleep, for fun and recreation, and a big reason to smoke marijuana was before you ate. Like before you go out to a nice dinner, older adults talk about that's a good time to smoke marijuana. Okay, so here's some of the risks. And the interesting one is number 2. There's no risk at all. I mean, many of them are older, particularly white, the white adults, really didn't see that there was anything that were under any legal risk at all. They couldn't imagine that they would ever get arrested. I mean, as long as they didn't smoke weed in front of a cop, they really felt that they were being protected. But if you see, it's number 3 is that some people were worried about legal risk. They were worried about respiratory problems, arrest. But the number 1 thing was concern about lung damage, respiratory problems. That was the big one. And very few of them, only 6 of the ones we've interviewed so far, sold marijuana.
Sheila, how are legal risks different from arrests?
Well, not so much. I think just it's not clear how that is different. But people would talk about legal risks and arrests, and
they were drawing a distinction.
They make that distinction. All these are their actual words. Okay. Oh, I forgot to say this at the beginning. If you have any questions, particularly clarifying questions, like if I say something you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, please ask me. All right? And there will be time at the end for us to get to do some discussing of these findings.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. Primary marijuana users, meaning they use it a lot?
No, meaning that's their favorite drug.
Oh.
You ask them, what drug do you like best? Which drug do you use the most? Which drug? And that's, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So we asked participants about their drug use other than marijuana in the 12 months prior to interview. There was not a lot of other drug use among the sample. Only 7 had used drugs other than marijuana. Of those, 2 mentioned more than one other drug. 4 had used psychedelics, 2 had used powder cocaine, 2 methamphetamine, and 1 ecstasy, and 1 used DMT. For the most part, these are older adults who have picked their drugs. They know which drugs they like to use, and they also know which alcohol they drink. I mean, they pretty much have figured out what works for them, and they don't do a whole lot of experimenting. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the emerging themes that have come out of the data. And the first one I've talked a little bit about, which is despite differences among marijuana users' motivations to use and early career vacillations in use patterns, over time users tend to fall into stable patterns of use that remain surprisingly consistent over long periods of time. And this was interesting to me, in that we have a sense that people that use drugs just use more and more and more of them. They develop a tolerance. It's a slippery slope. Soon, and they begin to use other drugs. And that just wasn't the case at all. What we found that was where people were very, very consistent and routinized about, not all of them, but a majority of them, were routinized about when they would use, what sorts of activities. Like I said, a very important piece was to relax. So at the end of the day, when all the responsibilities were done, the kids were in bed, or they'd finished their work for the day. That's when they would smoke, and with very, very regularly. And that was surprising. That was very surprising to me. The next slide is emerging things. Marijuana as substitution for problematic drug use. This also was really interesting, and there's been some research in the area of marijuana as a substitution drug. People talked about using it to quit smoking, to decrease or stop using alcohol. Several people talked about 20 years in the 80s when they were fooling around with cocaine, but one way they got out of it was to smoke weed. People are beginning to see its facility as a harm reduction tool for heavy drug users. Now, our participants don't really fit into that category, but they've had great success in using marijuana in a way to help them get their other kinds of drug use under control. This kind of flies in the face of all kinds of things that we hear about in treatment, right? I mean, the notion that the only way you can quit problematic cocaine use or alcohol use is complete abstinence. That if you fool around with other drugs, it's a slippery slope. So if you start smoking marijuana, pretty soon you're going to go back to drinking heavily or using cocaine. This was not the experience that we heard about from our study participants. They felt very successful in using marijuana to help them get their drug use under control. Okay, next slide. Oh, I forgot this one part. Participants also talked about using marijuana to help with the side effects of pharmaceuticals. Other studies have indicated that some users substitute cannabis for alcohol and other drugs, including prescription medications. Reasons for substituting marijuana included perceived safety, level of addiction potential, effectiveness in relieving symptoms, access, and level of acceptance. So for an example, a lot of older people have trouble sleeping. That's one of the curses of old age. But people were very afraid of sleeping medications. I don't know if you guys read about people being on Ambien, getting up and making weird meals and eating all kinds of food, taking Ambien, and finding themselves in their pajamas at their office, which is terrifying. I can't even imagine how awful that would be. And so the fears about these drugs, older people said, I'd rather smoke a little weed. It's not as addictive. I don't get up and make meals that I don't remember, and I certainly don't try and go out and drive my car. So that was really important. Other people that are on that are taking bipolar medications, antidepressants, who were troubled by the aluminum taste in their mouth, or just wanted some euphoria, right? Wanted to lift their spirits. Found that marijuana worked very well for them if they carefully titrated their marijuana dose with their other pharmaceuticals. So this was really interesting stuff. And the thing that was really interesting to me is people were very precise. They knew exactly how much, whether to use indica or sativa, how much to use, what time to use. One woman talked about she took a medication first thing in the morning, then after breakfast she'd smoke very small amounts of marijuana, like a couple of hits of marijuana, and that made her psychotropic medications more bearable for her and improved her life, basically, is the way she described it. Next slide. Oh, edibles. This part has been fascinating, and it so screwed us up because we didn't, when we were putting together the quantitative part of our interview, we did not realize how important edibles were going to be in understanding our study participants' relationship with marijuana. It's difficult. It's difficult enough to get people to tell you how much marijuana they're smoking. A couple of hits of very strong marijuana is very different from a couple of hits of not so strong. So trying to figure out issues of potency or even just how much someone is using. Now, if you put that in and you put gummies and lozenges and cookies and all those other things on top of it, it makes for some very interesting analyses. It's difficult to collect all the data, but we're trying really hard to get that. And as the market for edibles continues to grow, a wide variety of the cannabis products have emerged as alternatives to traditional plant products. And for those who were worried about their lungs or their respiratory systems, this was a godsend. People talked about getting their marijuana cards and their marijuana recommendations and walking into the dispensary and feeling like a kid in a candy store. It was just anything you wanted. It was just available. And you could try these different things. The problem with edibles, though, of course, is the issue of overdose. It's pretty easy to overdose, to have an accidental overdose on edibles. Everybody knows the story of, or has heard anecdotally the story of, going to a party and eating a pot brownie and then having the worst experience of your life because you didn't eat one pot brownie, you ate two. And it was too many, and you feel kind of awful afterwards. You sweat, you feel very uncomfortable. It's not a good experience. So some of the people that we interviewed had, particularly the early boomers. I have a hard time. Early seems like it should be younger, but it's really older. Anyway, particularly the older boomers, younger boomers, the early boomers had bad experiences, had overdosed. The mooncakes in Amsterdam. They went on their trip and they ate too much and they would never eat marijuana again. Some of them for years never smoked it again because it was such an unpleasant experience. So edibles are really important to this group, particularly if they're worried about their lungs. Yes?
So were the overdoses purely psychological? Did they have anxiety?
Oh, hell no. No. If you eat too much marijuana, you will have a terrible time, so don't do it. No, it's very easy to overdose. It's difficult you could smoke too much marijuana and feel crummy, but it's a lot harder to do than to eat it. And usually the It's sort of, the cure for that is to eat a bunch of food. That helps bring you down, right? But edibles can be really problematic if you don't know what you're doing. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. I mean, I know we like to think of, or at least some people like to think of marijuana as all beneficial and good. In fact, most of our study participants felt exactly like that. But edibles can pose some real problems. Yes?
Now, when you say there are like dangers from like overdosing on like type of like edible stuff, are there any like actual like, serious dangers, or is it just like a very, very bad time?
You feel bad for a number of hours.
Okay.
It's like a terrible hangover. I mean, you get over it. It's not dangerous in the sense of, I maybe shouldn't use the word dangerous. Thanks for saying that. I mean, it's not dangerous in the sense that you're going to die or that you're going to have permanent damage, but you can have an awfully bad time. For some people, that stopped them for a number of years from using. Okay. So we have a lot more products. I mean, it's amazing what people told me all about. There's Kool-Aid Tuesdays, where they have marijuana Kool-Aid. I mean, a lot of you people probably know more about the kinds of products than I do. They're around because I don't have a recommendation, so I haven't been in, but I've heard about it. I've heard about it. I've heard about the stores and how fabulous they are. Okay, so we have this whole new world of edibles that people are discovering and using to great effect, and very happy using them. One couple that we interviewed, they were 60 and 62, I think, at the time of the interview. And they used to, I don't know if you know gummies, they're like little gelatin. I think they're like 65 milligrams of THC. And the two of them like to eat gummies and go on these long bike rides. I mean, really long. And I was just looking at them like, really? What do you do if you get too high and you're on a bike and now you're someplace really far away from where you live? And of course, that did happen to them at one point. They had to call their friend to come drive and pick them up and pick up their bikes but they figured out the right dose, and they every weekend do gummies, take 25-mile bike rides. Amazing people. So, as baby boomers age, their health concerns grow, and many of our participants found themselves turning to alternative cannabis products to improve their mental and physical well-being and to reduce smoking-related risks. Okay. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, you did that. Okay. Okay, so this is one that we're really trying to get a handle on. I mean, one of the critiques among policymakers about medical marijuana dispensaries is that they're filled with stoners with no medical conditions at all. This is one of the things that you hear around the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and you certainly hear it in the newspaper articles about medical marijuana dispensaries. That people are just getting recommendations, that they really aren't sick, that they're just trying to get high, etc., etc. And the thing is that what we found was there's really, particularly with this cohort, there's really a blending of what's recreational and what is medicinal. And it's even hard for the users to talk about when they're using for medicinal purposes and when they're actually using for recreation. The same use episode, one woman told me that since she's been very young, she had migraines, really bad migraines. And she discovered in her teens that if she used very small amounts of not very good marijuana, a couple of hits, that it really, if she was able to start using the marijuana before that migraine came on, like when she just got the aura, she could stop it in its tracks. And that was wonderful because of the fact that the medications that you need to take for chronic migraines, are very heavy, and like Indorol is one of them, and it slows your heart down. And she hated that feeling. So I felt like I was a little engine that could. You know, I just always felt like I was working against myself, trying to, and that marijuana was very, very helpful for her. But at the same time, it also made her happy. And she enjoyed it. So for her, she was like, is this for fun or is this for medicine? It becomes blurred, becomes difficult for people to. And we had participants who went to the medical marijuana clubs, got their recommendation because they wanted access to edibles and plant products, and marijuana, how they wanted it and when they wanted it, and then found the medical utility. So that they went in with the notion, well, I just want this because I like to smoke weed, and then found, well, I don't have to take Ambien anymore, or my blood pressure medicine, which used to annoy me, is a little better now because of the marijuana use. So I think we certainly need to develop this more and learn more about it. So users with prescriptions use marijuana to help sleep, relieve anxiety, for pain relief. Users with prescriptions use their prescribed marijuana for recreational, often within the same use episode. So figuring out when you're medicating and when you're playing becomes a little difficult. And if we take off just had to think about policy. Well, how do you do that? I mean, do you have a recommendation that you can use marijuana medicinally, but you can't have any fun? That's not going to probably work. So it sort of places into question that sort of conflict. It's really not a conflict when it's lived. It's really just how that medicine is used. Okay. Now, another important theme that's come out of the first interviews we've done is the marijuana use and harm reduction. One of the things that's important is if you have a secure supply of a drug and you know you can use it and you know it'll be there when you want to use it, then the notion of going hog wild and using more than you want to because maybe it won't be here tomorrow doesn't happen. Right? People feel secure that when they want to have it, they're going to have it. It's there for them. And so they can control their use. At least that's the way they present it to us. So in some ways, they are able to moderate the quantities and frequency of use because of the secure supply thing. Also, they're, again, about the edibles, they're careful, they're pretty respectful of edibles. People are careful. They don't want to get the bad feelings. Not dangerous, just bad. And they, they are careful and exchange advice about it. I mean, change information about it too. And that's the other thing that the medical marijuana dispensaries are helpful with, is helping people understand how to use marijuana in a way that's safer and to get the results that they want. And they're also the clinics, and as well as are the alternative delivery systems, such as vaporizing, using the pens, using the packs, etc. It's interesting, though, the real old ones, the early boomers, all, for the most part, prefer joints. And that's because that's what they were raised with, I think. I don't know of any study that's compared how much THC you get from vaporizing versus smoking a joint. But that's it, to a person. And it's interesting because the late boomers are pipe smokers, or the one hit, they're more likely to use pipes. And that part is, somebody asked the psychological question, that part I have a feeling might have more to do with ritual and maybe psychological aspects to it. But I don't know for sure. I don't know. And the other issue that's really important for older adults is the settings where they use. They talked very specifically about who they like to smoke weed with, when they like to smoke weed, time of day. I mean, some people had very different, some of the older users had different patterns of use, but they consistently used the same way. Now, I don't know if that's just because they're old, and old people are, more routinized, but hopefully we're going to find out more about that. So, how many minutes time?
About 15 minutes.
I have 15 minutes
I
left.
think so.
Yeah, okay,
Is
cool.
that good?
Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, so I wanted to take a couple minutes and read you like a few stories, because I think stories are great, because they help you put a face to some of the participants. And these are pilot interviews we did prior to getting funded in order to give the NIH. Oh, thanks. One second. You could tell I needed it. Okay. And so we did these interviews with folks, and I'm still in contact with all three of these people, so I'm sort of following them. So we did these interviews, I think, in 2007, and I can tell you a little bit about where they are now, okay? In the course of developing our study design, we interviewed 3 baby boomers, 2 early and 1 late, that have used marijuana at different levels and in different amounts since they were in their early teens. Our first interviewee is a 56-year-old attorney who began using marijuana at the age of 14, that would be 1969, in San Francisco at the height of the hippie era, during which joints were passed freely at concerts in Golden Gate Park. He used what he characterized as moderate amounts on weekends with friends. At 16, his marijuana use began to escalate into a more frequent use pattern. He was 16 when he began experimenting with other drugs, mostly psychedelics and cocaine, but the drug he enjoyed most was marijuana. He considered it at the least, and this is his word, intrusive of all the drugs. And let me stop for a second here. In all the years that I've been doing drug research, heroin users, cocaine users, I started in the 70s and 80s. And when you interview someone that's had a cocaine or heroin habit, and you ask them about all the different drugs they use, they would often leave marijuana out. You'd have to say, well, don't you smoke weed? And they say, yeah, but that's not. Times have changed. So he considered it the least intrusive of all drugs. It was also inexpensive at the time. His psychedelic experimentation ended, but he continued using both marijuana and cocaine. His marijuana use continued to escalate until it reached his peak use between the ages of 18 and 22. His college years, when he used heavily on a daily basis, several times a day. After college, his use patterns went up and down due to changing social roles, marriage and divorce, responsibilities. He went to law school, work in parenting. At the time of the interview, he characterized his use as light or moderate. And he has maintained this pattern of use with short periods of cessation lasting about 2 weeks when he feels his lungs need a break. He will use larger quantities of marijuana in social settings with friends and family, but his daily use is minimal. A few puffs in the morning, a few puffs at night. He's a lawyer, so he tries to be discreet about his use in public, but he feels comfortable smoking at home. His use pattern hasn't changed in the last 5 years, or in the last 20 for that matter. Our second interview is a 49-year-old gay man who began using marijuana when he was 14. He's used heavily since his early 20s, between 6 and 10 joints of marijuana every day. He is one of the heaviest marijuana smokers we have ever interviewed on any of our projects. Well, and I should add, well, I'll get to it. In high school during the late 70s, he began selling marijuana and LSD to defray the cost of his own use. During his last years of high school, he used LSD 2 to 3 times a week and smoked at a minimum of 10 joints a day. He explained that he used less marijuana when he was using other drugs. At the time, he was selling enough LSD and marijuana to pay for his own use. These drugs were quite popular among his peers. His LSD use declined to once a month after high school, and he began living with his first partner, a chemist who manufactured ecstasy in the early 80s. He and his partner both used marijuana heavily and sold ecstasy for enough money for them to live a very expensive lifestyle. It was during this 5-year period that he used cocaine heavily as well, at least 1 gram a day, to the extent that he felt he lost control of his drug use and quit using cocaine altogether. He did not go to drug treatment and said stopping cocaine was no big deal. When his relationship ended because his partner died of AIDS, he began living with his current long-term partner, a small business owner and seller of between 2 and 4 pounds of marijuana a month. They have sold marijuana at the same levels for the past 25 years. He no longer uses any other illegal drugs, drinks alcohol only on special occasion. He worries about how much marijuana he uses because he feels it might be causing him respiratory problems, but he has not received any actual medical diagnosis. His doctor knows about his heavy use and encourages him to decrease his marijuana use. He's trying to be more moderate, but he tells us he plans on continuing to smoke marijuana forever. And that's the one thing I missed from one of the slides. Every single person we interviewed, when asked what their plans for future use, I plan on smoking marijuana forever. Nobody wanted to quit. Our third interviewee was a 62-year-old professional woman who also grew up in San Francisco and began smoking marijuana when she was 14. There's something in San Francisco you must get over. She only smoked marijuana a few times between 14 and 16 because she did not have access to a regular supply. By the time, she told the classic story that way we hear it an awful lot. People, for the first time they smoke marijuana, they realize, I've smelled this before, and I've smelled it at home. And that's how they figure out that their parents smoke weed. Because, of course, nobody's talking, particularly in the 60s and 70s. I don't know how many times I've heard that story. Okay, so by the time she was a senior in high school in 1967, the summer of love, marijuana was readily available and smoked fairly openly in her San Francisco community. And she began to smoke more often, mostly on weekends. While in college, she began using marijuana daily and also experimented with LSD, mushrooms, mescaline, and cocaine. She married when she was 26 and pregnant with her first daughter. While she was pregnant, she did not like the way the marijuana made her feel, so she didn't smoke it. She gave birth to another daughter 2 years later, and while her children were little, she rarely used any drugs or alcohol at all. She explained that the children took up all of her attention and time. She and her husband divorced in 1980. Over the ensuing years, she went back to graduate school, earned an advanced professional degree, and used marijuana off and on. Sometimes just on the weekends, and other times small amounts daily, depending on who I was hanging out with. Currently, she uses cocaine, that was a quote, depending on who I was hanging out with mainly. I didn't say that. Currently, she uses cocaine very rarely and marijuana sporadically, often going 2 or 3 weeks without smoking because she has difficulty controlling her food intake when intoxicated, which exacerbates her weight problem. Otherwise, she hasn't experienced any health-related problems from her use, and regarding future marijuana use, she told us that she enjoys the marijuana high and feels that in the long run, the benefits outweigh the negatives. I cannot envision myself not smoking marijuana. Our pilot interviewees, born in 49, 54, and 62, descriptions of their marijuana using patterns reflect the experiences of early and late boomers' marijuana use and potential outcomes of long-term use. School, family, and work responsibilities served to decrease their marijuana use, but so did their use of other drugs. We use the key informants' experiences to inform our initial inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we rely on them and other community contacts to help us recruit potential study participants. Okay. All right, well, let me just to the last slide, what our final conclusions are. But again, let me just go over. So the stability of use patterns over long, decades-long periods of time. Marijuana as a substitution drug for problematic use of other drugs, and as a complementary drug to some prescribed medications. People found that they were happier, or they felt better if they were able to incorporate marijuana along with some of these other drugs. The role of edibles as both harm reduction and a new drug experience. Also, the blurring of medicinal versus recreational use is important, and also their harm reduction practices. Thank you very much. Any questions? Comments? Yeah.
How did you choose the people that you interviewed? And it seems like, did they already, were you looking for people that had been using cannabis for a long time? Or did you choose a certain?
Well, the inclusion and exclusion criteria, people had to have, oh, shouldn't do that, makes a big bad noise. People had to have used in the previous 6 months at least 24 times. And they had to be a certain age. It turns out that most of the people that we interviewed, they weren't new users. Okay. That's something we're looking for. That's what the people we would like to interview. Get some older boomers that have either taken it up after long periods of time or are new to the whole experience. We
I was
definitely.
asking also too because I run a medical marijuana facility in Arcadia that's been there for 15 years. And when I started being the director 7 years ago, we didn't have as many baby boomers as we have a huge amount right now. And a lot of them have never used before or have used like when they were in their younger high school days. And because of illness, because of medical marijuana, I think they're getting into it with all the education and all the information that's going out into the public now. And some of the senior newspapers are starting to tell them, and their own children are trying to get them involved in that because they're seeing their parents are not very healthy right now, and they don't like all the pharmaceutical drugs. So we're finding a lot of baby boomers are starting to come into the facility that have not.
I'm sorry, I missed what facility.
That's on Patient Resource Center. It's a cannabis center in Arcadia that we have. We have about 2,000 patients, and we're finding our average age is about 42, but in the last probably 3 to 4 years, I would say, we are seeing, and probably the last 2 years, we have had an influx of baby boomers that are using it, that have not used it ever before, need to. So we are becoming more educated ourselves because we need to educate. And also, not smoking, they don't want to smoke. So the edibles are also now the new vaporizing types that they have. And
those are very big too.
Using those now, or the edibles, tinctures, salves, all the new products that are out there. And needing to be educated because they're not coming in with the concept of I used this before, it was just fine, and everything was good, and they're coming in with I've never used this, and I don't know, but my son told me to come in, or my doctor told me to come in, or
so far we've gotten some very seasoned marijuana users, and it would be very interesting for us to get.
I have lots of
Unfortunately, I got to do the San Francisco Bay Area, but if they move, it'd be great. No. I really think there's so many things I didn't talk about. One of the things I didn't talk about is one of the papers we're developing right now is about baby boomers and their babies, basically talking about the relationship of the baby boomer, how their parents talk to them about their drug use, if they talked at all, which most didn't, and how they talk to their children, and how children, by children I mean 20-something, 30-something-year-old people, are often their sources for marijuana. The other thing about medical recommendations is people who are still working are less, they're more worried about getting a medical marijuana card recommendation. The retired people are like, yippee, who's going to get mad at me now? You know, and so they have a very different sort of orientation. But some of the late boomers, you know, literally rely on their kids to get them weed. And so that's very interesting stuff. I mean, how, you know, you start out telling your kids, don't use drugs, don't use any drugs, please don't use any drugs, I don't want you to use any drugs, but could you get me some weed? Yeah.
Well, when you get a grant from the NIH, I guess it is, is it agenda, I mean, when you apply for your grant, is it agenda driven by the NIH? What do they want you to produce?
Okay. Good question. They would like, well, I shouldn't say they're not a monolith. There's people at the National Institute of Drug Abuse, believe it or not, that smoke marijuana. And, but in general, if you look at Nora Valco and you know, read what she's come out, Nora Valco is the head of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And they're not pro-marijuana by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, think of it as a dangerous gateway drug. So the NIH puts out program announcements, and they ask for certain kinds of research projects in which they want you to study certain things. They don't tell you what to find. We are scientists. We're supposed to actually do the research and look at what the data tells us. So there's nothing like that that goes on. But the fact that it took me 5 times to get this project funded tells you that one of the things that's very difficult, at least on the administrative level, is the notion that there could be controlled drug use. Yes?
So then when you started this study, or trying to get the grant money, what was your goals?
My goal was to do a life course study in which I found, in order to find out how people used marijuana, to what purpose, and how they stayed out of trouble. You know, how they didn't get arrested, how they folded that into a conventional life. How do you go to your job, raise your children, pay your mortgage, and smoke weed? How did you do that in the period of time in which you lived? When I was in high school, possession of marijuana was a felony, right? That's really changed over time. So I wanted to know how people, that was what I was interested in. I think that maybe the National Institute of Drug Abuse would like it if I found some negative findings. And certainly, certainly this whole thing about edibles I think it's really important that, you know, we get that, that people understand that they can have some bad consequences, as can smoking marijuana. I mean, in terms of, you can have a really bad experience. But my goal is to discover what are the rules and regulations. How do people do this? How do you decide that do you smoke weed in the car with your kids? No, people don't do that. Right? They don't. I mean, who wants a very stoned child? They're stoned enough as it is on their own. But there are rules. People have rules, and I want to discover what those are and where they came from. That's what I was interested in. Yeah.
I'm an early old baby boomer myself, so of course I found your presentation very interesting and was kind of checking off things that were similar and different. But I'm curious, because my experience is of the baby boom generation. To what extent do you think what you're finding with those two cohorts informs us about later or more recent generations of marijuana use?
That's a good question. And what I originally tried to, when I was first designing the study, what I wanted to do, but I could never get funded, was do a study of young 18 to 30-year-olds and old baby boomers, or early baby boomers, because I felt that the policy context was very similar, right? And that I thought that would be fascinating. Nobody else thought that besides me, and I never got any money. But that's essentially what I started out with. Yeah, you, I think, were first.
Well, I am an early baby boomer, and I have a mother. And my mother, like many of her generation, has COPD because they were smokers, like smoking tobacco. So are you planning on researching really old people, not just those young old people?
I would love to. I really would. I mean, that's not my mission on this particular project, but I would love to.
Because they knew about it. I remember my dad saying he used to get paid a nickel an hour to dig it out of ditches in Kansas. And I said, so was it any good? Did it smoke good? And he said, oh no, I used the nickels to go to town and buy tobacco. This is a man that died of lung cancer.
Right, exactly. My father died of lung cancer as well.
And
but
it had
he was a marijuana smoker.
But it had a racial overtone. My father was very white.
Yeah.
And he said, we didn't smoke it. We never even tried it because Mexicans and Indians smoked.
Right. Wow.
So it seems to me that generation, you got to be quick because they're leaving. Even the ones that didn't smoke. But I'd be really interested in if any of them have adopted it for pain use or sleeplessness or.
I can't imagine that hasn't happened. My dad. I remember coming home from college and talking about marijuana as the peace drug. It was for peace. People that smoked marijuana were peaceful people. And my dad said, you have got to be kidding. He said, in Mexico, fighters that are going into the ring smoke weed before they go in to fight. It's what you bring to the drug experience. When you decide you want to beat the crap out of somebody, this is what you can do. That there's no... Back in the 60s, that there was politics that was attached, and there was a membership that was attached to weed smoking.
That was a lot of the attraction because the weed wasn't good.
No. No. Do you remember those trays where you had all the sticks and the stems?
Yeah, the kids think we make that up.
No, they used to literally sell you trees. Here you go. But that's very interesting. And I think as we move more, I think we're moving towards more medical, more marijuana. More widely available, and certainly in some states we're seeing legalized marijuana. So I think we'll see more and more of it. And its facility as a medicinal drug is just being discovered. I mean, we're really finding, and some of the discovery is going on with some of the patients who are using it and realizing, wow, this is really helping me with my arthritis pain. It's really helping me with other things. So that's a fascinating thing. I don't know if I'll be the one to be able to do it, but I hope somebody does. Yeah. Oh, yes, you haven't had a chance.
You're talking about not finding any negative consequences. I'm curious, did nobody find that they spent times of their life where they used it too much? And
certainly, no. I didn't. If I gave that impression, I'm sorry. Everybody, 57 people that we interviewed all said they weren't going to stop smoking weed. But certainly there was negative consequences. The 2 people on the bicycles that got stuck, they didn't think that was great, And also, people spend a lot of money. We've also, the young gay man, and the gay man that I talked about, was spending like $1,000 a month on, so you can spend a lot of money. That could be a negative consequence. Certainly, being discovered by certain people, maybe your employer, maybe your kids, those are negative consequences. Getting the munchies and eating too much, what's what I talked about. It can be problematic in terms of controlling your weight. Certainly there's all kinds of, with pretty much any substance that we use, whether it's yogurt or milk or whatever, there can be some negative consequences. So no, it's not a free ride. I mean, it's a drug, it's a poison, right? It's all in the dose. Yeah.
So when you're doing these grants, do you have to do periodic reviews with some sort of board or something like that, and what
Our
they-
review, we get reviewed by, there's a peer review process. You don't get the funding until 28 of your peers review your grant, give it a priority score, and then it goes to the NIDA funding council. So there's quite a rigorous review process before you even get to start the grant. And only about 18%, I think it's now, 18% of grants get funded that are submitted. So yes, and the other part of it, yes, we have to turn in progress reports every year, of course. And the big review, though, is when you try and publish your findings. That's when your peers get to look at your methods and your findings and your interpretation of the findings and either decide it's worth publishing or not. Yes.
So once it's published, is there some sort of directive that they take from your research?
Wouldn't that be lovely? We all hope so. I mean, I hope, I know that some of the work I've done have influenced some policy. But NIH is a research agency. The policy piece is, so yes and no is my answer to that question. Yeah.
Yes. Why is it important to sift usage into the categories of medicinal and recreational?
Why is it important?
Yes.
Because I think that the participants do
So-
that. And because because of the policy context is that the notion that the only way you can legally get marijuana or cannabis in California anyway is through a medical dispensary.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big criticisms of these medical dispensaries is that they are not in fact serving sick people, that they are in fact serving people who want to smoke weed and that don't have any medical condition. So understanding that is very important, both because participants see it as important and because of sort of the policy context. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, over here. Oh, you. Did I let you talk? Good. Yes. Sorry.
It's okay. So you mentioned an intersectionality approach, and did you find that any of your emerging themes that there were different experiences based on?
Yeah. I mean, this is just really. I mean, I literally. The reason this is such a childish PowerPoint without any graphics or any of the cool stuff is because I did it myself. Like, you know, we did interview 57 on Wednesday, so we're really just. This is just the beginning. Yes. Obviously, when we actually do more of the analyses, we're definitely going to look at all the things I told you about. I think you were next, then you.
So, well, thank you for sharing your early results with us. What fraction of folks are getting their marijuana from dispensaries, and or what's your sense of that? And then also, did you happen to ask, or do you happen to know, are any of these folks working in the marijuana industry, producing? You had some numbers about selling or working at dispensaries themselves. Any
We
insight on that?
We haven't interviewed anybody that's told us that they're working in a dispensary, and 6 of them were selling street sales. Okay, the 6 that were selling. Now, as far as about, let me see. I actually have that right here, somewhere here. Is how many people were on 50, almost 60% did not have a recommendation. So, okay.
There's a question in the back there, Sheila.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yes, yes, sorry.
I was wondering how you, back to the recreational versus medical use, I was wondering how it is that you chose the definitions for those, or did you leave it up to the participants?
The participants, for the most part, doing the kind of research that we do, we look to the participants to make the definitions. Right? So what they consider to be medical, that's what we're looking at.
But you said that there were some that said there was a gray area.
Well, for most people, making the medication versus recreation was difficult for them to do. When we probed about that, they will go, well, you know, I use it for my, but then it makes me feel good. You know, It's that I feel the least comfortable about that particular term. Anybody else? Yes.
Don had a question too.
Oh yeah, you first.
I found it interesting that you called it a drug career. Was there any correlation between their drug career and their occupation and
Sure,
how they achieve?
certainly some occupations lend themselves to, some occupations make it difficult. If you're in an occupation where you're being drug tested, for an example, that will certainly limit your marijuana use. But the notion of career, it says that basically we're looking at how people start and stop and there's the stages and sequences of their use. But certainly the kind of work that somebody does has an effect on how they use, who they use with, who they tell about their use. All those things are really tied together. Yeah.
I'm interested in what appears to me a really rich, ethnographically speaking, world that you create and construct. Starting with your chain referral system and building a rapport with your participants, and your commentary about how your participants have developed their own harm reduction, mitigation strategies, and combining it or not combining it with other drugs. And I happened to look at your two studies on ecstasy and how you interviewed presumably illicit, dealers trafficking in ecstasy and how they combine that with marijuana too.
Right.
But tell us about your method. I mean, it's so, it seems so aesthetically and artistically pleasing to me, the way you build that rapport and get so much data. And,
Well, you'd be amazed at how easy it is, frankly. Even with people that are using drugs that they're very ashamed of. Like even people, I've interviewed women who used heroin while pregnant. One of the things I think that works for us, is I've been doing this a long time, but is we tell our participants that they are the center. We treat them like they're like a paid consultant, because that's what they are. Right? And so they're the center of the interaction. They guide. We have things we want to talk about, but they determine how they're going to talk about what they're doing. The thing that's very interesting, though, with all of these illicit drugs, is they're very grateful for the opportunity to have to share with us the knowledge that they've accumulated. And to have someone to talk to for 2 or 3 hours who is interested in their drug use, but not judgmental about it. I never tell somebody, oh, you should go to treatment. And now, I'm not doing a therapeutic interview. That's not what I'm doing. I mean, if people say, I need housing, we have referrals for them. But I'm not trying to change you. I'm just trying to understand you, okay? And understand what you're doing. The problems we have is getting it to stop, getting the interviews to stop. People really enjoy, and they like the opportunity to talk about something that's very important part of their lives. So, certainly there are people that don't, that we try and recruit and they don't want to, for whatever reason. But the folks that come in are, for the most part, and we offer them copies of the transcripts, and people really enjoy that. It's sort of like a life history. It's sort of like a memoir of sorts. So a lot of people can't tell a whole lot of people that are important to them in their lives about their drug use. So it's in some ways, it's like if you ever been on a plane late at night and had a conversation with a stranger. It's kind of like that. People really open up and tell you a lot of things because you don't know them, right? Yeah.
So, on your emerging themes, it says marijuana is a substance drug for problematic use of other drugs. I've basically heard you talk about cocaine, heroin.
Cigarettes.
Does your study also cover Paxil and all these, all these other psychotropic drugs that are supposed to make you feel feel good? I mean, as
It covers it in the sense that when we ask them what they use marijuana for, and if they say that it helps, it makes using Paxil easier or better for whatever reason, yeah, then we do talk about that. We're mainly
Has there been reduction of their use of those drugs and marijuana replacing those drugs?
Sometimes we've heard about that. Sometimes we've heard, but for the most part, you know, I mean, it's pretty. For the most part, the people that we've talked to have continued to use their drugs. They've just used marijuana to deal with some of the bad side effects. The drugs that we found that people have stopped using are sleeping medications.
Yeah.
That's goodbye. But you know,
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I haven't heard anything.
So, would you say marijuana is more of a getting away drug, like more on your own time, or is it like a social drug? Because you said that it would be more of a self thing, you know?
Well, I mean, people. There was a lot of people that used alone because they used it before they went to bed. Right? But it seems I don't feel comfortable making some generalization about every baby boomer because I only talked to 57 of them, right? But it seems like our own research and other people's research is the sociability part is a little bit less important. I mean, people, like if you're going out to a very nice dinner, people talked about with another couple that they might smoke a few puffs of weed before they went in. But there's not like, you know, college parties where you walk in and there's hundreds of kids and marijuana smoke is this thick. Not so much for older people. They don't do that so much. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys.
Oh, I'm sorry?
I was wondering if there was any, do you have anybody involved in your study who's of a younger generation?
Yes.
Not necessarily like
Yes.
a participant, but is involved?
Well, I unfortunately didn't put the names of all the staff, but let me see, 3 or 4 of the other staff, they're all in their 20s. So yeah, there's other people on my staff that are younger. But we're not interviewing younger people. I have interviewed over the course of years, I've interviewed folks that have used, all different ages that have used marijuana, but not on this project. Okay, I'm going to take one more. Yeah.
So you said they're paid consultants. Do you pay them?
Yes, pay them. Yes, I do. That's why you get this
How
money.
much do you pay them?
$100
For a couple hours of their
3
time?
to 5 hours. So it's
That could be another reason why they're very forthcoming.
yeah, because
That's
then they
great.
got money to go to the marijuana store. Yeah. Thank you.